So forget it. There you go. That's done. As our guests come on, they hear that as well. So just remember, there's like that. They come in, they hear that, and then it becomes live for them. Hi, Chantal.
Hi, sorry, I was actually finishing another call.
No worries.
I apologize.
It's okay. We've got some technical challenges with Sebastian at the moment. His building just lost power, so he's now. Won't be joining us unless you can find a way to connect back in. Hopefully, it comes back on, but we'll manage.
Yeah, well, Michael is a star. Can we hear him
there
talk
you
today?
You can talk today.
Salut David.
Salut Chantal.
Ça fait plaisir de te voir. J'aime la barbe.
Ben oui, ça change, hein?
I love it. Voilà, Sébastien. Hi, Andine.
Hi, how are you? Sorry, I was texting you. I just wanted to make sure you were on.
Yeah, sorry. Thank you for checking in. I appreciate that.
No worries. Okay. Sebastian, there you go, the backup.
Incredible.
Works pretty well.
Yes. Just a little smaller in the screen, but we're there. Okay, that's great. Okay, I'm going to, time are we at? 2:55, 5 minutes, just time check. Okay. There we go.
David, do you know everybody on the call?
No.
No? So, Danielle?
We've introduced.
Okay, perfect. I'm sorry. Here I am.
No worries, no worries.
Yeah, but not with everyone. Not with everyone.
So Andine, which is our winemaker at Share Splash. So David is actually the sommelier at Maison Boulud in Montreal. And hopefully when you have a chance to come back, we'll go. It's one of my go-to places for lunch. I love it. It's such a great place. And then, je pense que est-ce que tu as rencontré Sébastien et Michael?
Oui.
Okay, parfait.
Bon, David, je pense qu'on s'est peut-être déjà vu à Montréal ou dans quelques fonctions, peut-être
on
s'est déjà croisés, oui, bon. Donc, également hâte de revenir à la Maison Boulud.
Ouais. Beaucoup de monde qui aimerait ça.
Ouais.
Vraiment.
Ouais, j'en doute pas.
Comment ça se passe en ce moment avec, parce que bon, je sais que, est-ce que l'hôtel est ouvert?
Oui, l'hôtel est ouvert. On fait quand même pas mal de room service.
Mm-hmm.
On a aussi la chance d'avoir les équipes de hockey qui viennent chez nous.
Mm.
Donc ça remplit quand même l'hôtel.
Ah ouais.
Et puis ben, nous, on fait toujours les plats emportés à Maison Boulud.
Mm-hmm.
Et puis on fait Maison Boulud en chambre aussi, donc ça nous apporte quand même un certain revenu. Donc c'est correct, mais des fois je me dis comment font les autres qui ont un pourcentage d'occupation qui est super bas là. Des fois quand je passe devant le Sofitel, j'ai l'impression qu'il n'y a pas beaucoup de chambres de prise.
C'est fou.
C'est fou. Déjà que nous on a juste du revenu pour faire tourner la machine. C'est une grosse machine, le Ritz-Carlton. Hein.
Mm-hmm.
Donc, on a hâte que ça réouvre pour faire rentrer un petit peu d'argent pour repartir sur de bonnes bases.
Oui, vraiment.
On se croise les doigts pour cet été.
On espère cet été. Hein.
Ouais.
Paul,
ça parle de la fête des mères ou peut-être même plus tard, 24 juin, j'ai entendu. Mais bon, c'est pas sûr encore. Ça peut tomber aussi la semaine prochaine, on ne sait rien.
Funny, we have the same things, the same hopes in the United States. We're hoping by Mother's Day or by summer, everyone keeps saying, but forgive me, I can understand you. My French is terrible speaking back, but at least I can follow the conversation.
Paul, I made you host, so you'll have to actually start the webinar.
Okay.
If you could appoint me co-host now, that would be helpful.
How can I do this? Let me check.
Click on my image and then the three buttons.
Yep, that's done.
Okay, there we go. Start webinar. Okay, webinar has begun, so people will now start to come in. I'm going to go off video and mute.
Est-ce qu'ils ont annoncé Grand Prix? Est-ce que ça va... Ils n'ont rien dit encore?
Non, rien dit. Mais de toute façon, il n'y aura pas de spectateurs. Hein.
Non, ça, je savais, mais je me suis dit... parce que c'était la première course en fin de semaine, donc je suis curieuse de voir s'ils vont faire la course.
Il n'y a pas eu d'annonce encore de fait là-dessus.
Ouais. Parce que c'est sûr que vous allez recevoir sûrement
une équipe. On aura une équipe, mais bon, on ne sait pas. C'est la surprise.
Un gros mystère.
Ouais.
Fait que tu travailles dessus un petit peu moins?
Non, on travaille toujours. Oui, ben, en fait, on est juste ouvert 4 jours semaine. Mais par contre, on travaille toujours autant. Hein. Tu sais, parce qu'il y a quand même tous les plats importés qu'il faut gérer, plus d'autres petites choses comme les room service et ainsi de suite. Donc on a de l'occupation.
OK, je pense qu'on va commencer. Les gens commencent à se joindre un tout petit peu. Je vais juste cacher ça comme ça. OK. Donc, bonjour à tous. Je m'appelle Paul Desroches et je représente les vins de Californie au Québec. Je suis fier de vous présenter notre deuxième session de sommelier au Québec. Donc, pour l'arrivée du printemps, on a concocté un webinaire avec 2 producteurs qui attaquent le défi d'offrir la meilleure qualité possible à un prix raisonnable. Donc, tout au long du webinaire, nos producteurs vont répondre à vos questions et vont parler des décisions créatives qu'ils ont prises pour maximiser la valeur de leurs produits. Donc, nos 2 invités d'honneur aujourd'hui sont Undine Chatham, qui est chef vigneron de Share Splash Wine Company, et Michael Bolak, chef vigneron pour Chalk Hill Estate, qui est une propriété de Foley Family Wines. Welcome to both of you.
Thank you.
We are delighted to have you here with us. Avant de commencer la discussion, voici rapidement quelques petites règles maison. Donc, premièrement, le webinaire est enregistré et vous recevrez tous un lien vers la vidéo dans les journées à venir. Ensuite, en tant que spectateur, vous êtes tous sur mute pendant toute la durée du webinaire. Cependant, vous remarquerez que vous avez 2 modes de communication. Il y a la boîte de chat, où vous pourrez communiquer à tous les membres et spectateurs. Et vous avez aussi accès à une boîte de questions-réponses, le Q&A, où vous pourrez poser vos questions aux panélistes du webinaire. Gênez-vous surtout pas pour l'utiliser. On a conçu ce webinaire-là pour vous, les membres de l'industrie du vin, pour offrir non seulement une séance d'information, mais aussi un moyen d'échanger avec les producteurs et de poser vos questions. Particulièrement aujourd'hui, alors qu'on parle à 2 winemakers qui, ensemble, ont plus de 50 ans d'expérience dans l'industrie. Donc, notre session d'aujourd'hui sera plus du style questions-réponses avec les winemakers. En plus, certains d'entre vous ont reçu les vins d'un ou l'autre des 2 producteurs participant à l'événement. Donc, on divise les lots comme ça permet de rejoindre un plus grand nombre de sommeliers pour un peu maximiser le bonheur et la découverte des vins de Californie. Je vous invite donc à poser des questions aux panélistes tout au long du webinaire en anglais ou en français. Par ailleurs, nos producteurs d'aujourd'hui étant anglophones, parce que Undine comprend le français un petit peu, on va naviguer entre le français et l'anglais au courant du webinaire. Donc, si vous avez des questions, si vous avez besoin qu'on traduise des morceaux, n'hésitez surtout pas à faire la demande aux panélistes. Finalement, je vous invite à bien écouter nos producteurs. Une bouteille de chaque vin discuté aujourd'hui sera offerte au sommelier qui répondra correctement aux questions de nous autres. D'ailleurs, on a 2 invités importants aujourd'hui. Je vous présente Chantal Landreville et Sébastien Ouellette. Donc, originaire de Montréal, Chantal est directrice des ventes pour le Canada et pour l'international pour Share Splash Wine Company. Ayant fait ses classes parmi les plus grandes agences de vins spiritueux au Québec, Chantal a su développer une expérience marquée en vin californien. Et Sébastien, Montréalais de naissance, est directeur régional des Amériques pour Foley Family Wines. Il est responsable du Canada, de l'Amérique centrale, du Sud et des Caraïbes. Durant les 15 dernières années, il a développé les Amériques pour plusieurs producteurs de vins familiaux. Ils vont être là pour répondre à toutes les questions concernant les vins dégustés, les questions de mise en marché, tout ça. De plus, on a aussi la chance d'avoir avec nous David Boiran, chef sommelier à la Maison Boulude au Ritz-Carlton, qui est un des plus fameux restaurants de Montréal, reconnu particulièrement pour sa cave à vin de grande qualité. Bonjour David. En plus de pouvoir poser des questions en live à nos winemakers, David va aussi déguster les vins de Cannonball et en faire la description pour notre bénéfice. Donc, n'hésite surtout pas à intervenir pendant toute la session. Alors, sans plus attendre, bienvenue à tous dans le fabuleux California Wine Country. Donc, on va commencer avec les vins de Foley Family Wines, soit les deux Chardonnay, Sebastiani California Chardonnay et Chalk Hill Sonoma Coast Chardonnay. On va déguster Chardonnay et particulièrement les différences clonales et les décisions qu'un winemaker doit prendre lorsqu'il vient le temps de l'assemblage, même en monocépage. On va aussi visiter le Chalk Hill AVA, qui est une petite AVA située entre le Russian River AVA et la Alexander Valley AVA. Donc, très petit AVA. On va commencer avec une courte histoire de Sebastiani, qui est détenue par Foley Family Wines. Ici, on parle d'une maison qui a été créée en 1904 et un des premiers vignobles dans le Sonoma County à mettre le cépage de l'avant avec son Cabernet Sauvignon monocépage. On voit que la matière première est importante dans l'élaboration des vins de Sebastiani. Après plus de 100 ans, la compagnie est passée aux mains de Foley Family Wines, qui détient aussi Chalk Hill Estates. On va donc discuter de ces deux chardonnays que nous avons devant nous avec Michael Bolak, qui est Senior Winemaker pour Chalk Hill Estate. Hi, Michael.
Hello there. How are you doing today?
Very good. Thank you very much.
Great.
So, Michael, during your many years working as a winemaker, you've worked closely with Chardonnay, and my understanding is that you've developed a deep passion for the varietal. So my first question would be this. Currently here in Quebec at the SAQ, almost 2/3 of white California wines are Chardonnay based. So what has made the success of Chardonnay in California?
Well, I think it really comes down to that Chardonnay is really good at mirroring the climate that it's planted in. So if you plant Chardonnay in a cooler area, such as Chalk Hill AVA, you get one type of fruit. It has a little more acidity, maybe a little more of peaches, pear type of thing. Whereas if you grow it in, say, Lodi, Central Valley, it is a warmer region and the fruit expresses itself deeper, has a rich feeling to it. It doesn't usually have quite the acidity, but it just, wherever it's planted, it mimics where it grows.
I see. So it's very versatile.
Very versatile. I mean, a few years ago, we had over 90,000 acres of Chardonnay planted. The next closest white grape was French Cannonball at like 25,000. So it is the mother lode of Chardonnay, of grapes for California, excuse me.
Amazing. So over your many vintages as a winemaker, you probably have had a lot of game time decisions in the production process. Can you tell us of one of the most, or some of the most important decisions you must make when working with single varietal wines specifically?
Well, I think it's not that different than anything else. Every day you're making decisions. You've decided where you're going to plant, what kind of clones you're going to have, what kind of trellising, pruning, yields, your crop loads. Then you get into harvest decisions, your picking decisions. What ripeness levels are you looking for? You know, at Chalk Hill, we pick really ripe because we want that mouthfeel, that richness that the wines have. And then there's, you know, barrel selection, pressing, stirring, batonnage, blending. I can't identify one of the major things. During harvest, that time of year, they just come fast and furious, so I will say that.
Do you feel like it's harder before the harvest or after the harvest?
Oh, before the harvest.
Yeah.
The month of August, as you're gearing up, is always this challenge. Are we ready? You know, is the press going to work? We haven't turned the press on in a couple of years. And of course, we turn it on and run it. But, you know, is everything going to work? What are going to be the breakdowns, your staffing? But once you get into harvest, it becomes this whole rhythm of how you're picking, you're processing, you're going down to barrel. It becomes this dance almost of how you choreograph what's happening at the winery every day. It's a fun time. It's a really fun time. It's tiring.
I can imagine. We have one question from Claude. He's asking if there's is there a major move away from wood aging with Chardonnay in California?
I don't think so. I think what California did was like what we do with so many things in California. We push it to the extreme. So we're pushing new barrels, the intensity of malolactic per se. And so a lot of Chardonnays were coming out with, 100% new French oak, new American oak for that matter. I think people are backing off on that, but I think that Chardonnay, more than any other white varietal, really wants to have, it's lifted by the barrel. So I don't see that as going away. I think people are dialing it back. And certainly there are some people who are making, stainless steel fermented Chardonnays, but I think the major push on the high quality people is really still barrel ferments.
Great. Terroir, I think, plays an important part in winemaking. So do you think that Chardonnay, I think we touched this a little bit earlier, do you think Chardonnay is more susceptible to terroir variations than other varietals? I think you said that difference between Lodi and Sonoma, for instance, are quite significant.
Yeah, I think it is. I mean, on this property, Chalk Hill, we have multiple soil types, and we plant it in different soil types because it shows its face differently. And in fact, we bottle some of those separately because we think it's really important that the soil does drive the flavor along with the climate, of course.
Right. I have a interesting question. A lot of time we talk about old vine for red wine, so mostly old vine Zinfandel, but it's rarely a subject about around white wines. How does the age of a vine affect the style of wine produced, especially for white wines, for instance?
Well, I think that, vines definitely have a life cycle. They kind of come into their own, I would say, year 8, year 9, or something like that. And then hopefully, if they're planted in the right place and taken care of, they tend to become more intense over the years. And what you'll find is an older vine, and now with Chardonnay, I'm saying, 30 years tends to be kind of on the older side. Your yields are going to drop, but maybe your intensity is going to build. And it's not unlike red wines, where at some point you have to say, is the yield and the quality at the right point for the wine that we're trying to make? So for here, we continuously are replanting. If a vine does die in the vineyard or becomes too weak, we will pull it and put a new one in the ground. And so we look at the average age of the vineyard. As a vineyard gets older, not all the vines in it are going to be 40 years. Some are only going to be 8 years old too.
Mm-hmm. One question from Claude. What techniques do you use to keep freshness given climate changes? That's actually a good question.
I look at it as picking decisions. We tend to be picking a little bit earlier. We still want ripe wines, but instead of harvest starting, the beginning of September, maybe it's starting the end of August now. So we'll pick earlier, make sure that things don't get overripe. Cool fermentations always help keep freshness alive. That was true before. But I think that we're looking at where we're planting, and picking decisions are the primary drivers. I
see. And how have you, and maybe that could be a question to Undine as well as to you, Michael, but have climate change affected some styles of wines that you used to see in the past that you now cannot produce in your respective regions?
Undine?
I don't have anything that I cannot produce any longer. We are very fortunate in Sonoma County to be influenced by the Pacific Ocean. So we still have, it's interesting, the warmer it gets inland, so the central part of California, that creates a convection current that actually brings the fog in. It pulls the fog in off of the Pacific. So now the fog has to be there in the first place. So of course, global warming will be an issue eventually. But right now, we're pretty blessed, I would have to say. There's a seasonality to it. Some vintages are warmer than others. but there isn't anything yet that is off limits. And people have come up with really creative things, even in Napa, which tends to be much warmer. And I know Michael worked there for a long time, so he can speak to it, but you see some shade canopies being strung up, just anything that can take a few degrees off and cool the vine growing area. So we're working around it in general, but there hasn't been anything that's been eliminated at this point from this North Coast area.
I see.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think that, this morning I lived up on top of a ridge, and looking down, the valley floor was filled with the fog, and, it's not even going to be that warm. It's going to be 70, 75 degrees today. But the fog is always present. And I think Ondine has a great point that really helps us here in Sonoma County.
Amazing. Great. Let's start with the, maybe we can start tasting with the Sebastiani Chardonnay. So I'm going
Absolutely.
to bring
Everyone have a bottle, I hope.
So I'm going to be sharing the technical sheet for this for the sake of everybody here. I also have my glass here. So so this one, although it's not a Lodi AVA, most of the grapes or all of the grapes are sourced from the Foley family estate vineyards in that AVA. Am I right with that?
You are. And so most of this comes from northern Lodi. It's just south of the Sacramento River Delta. So it's a little bit colder or cooler, not colder, cooler than, say, Lodi proper. It is a warmer region than, Russian River Valley, Sonoma County, but I think that you still have a nice freshness on this. It has apple, there's some spice to it.
Definitely. So this is only aged in stainless steel tanks?
It goes into barrel and to stainless.
I see. Okay. So half of it, yeah. So do you have any batonnage to do with this wine, or is it mostly just a barrel in the tanks?
We do batonnage two ways. One is in the barrel, the traditional with a stirring rod, but we also will bubble a tank, bubble nitrogen through the tank and get it stirring, and that'll bring up some of the leaves in a larger tank. And that helps integrate the mouthfeel, the richness to the wine that we're looking for.
I see, which is very, very well integrated as well. So what are some of the food pairings you would make with this wine?
I think this goes great with poultry, a cream sauce. Both of the wines that I have to show today have a richness to them and will stand up well to a lot of different foods. But I'm a big fan of cream and mustard sauces. So I think it would go great with both of those.
Definitely. Amazing. So that's our number one wine. The second wine is going to be from Chalk Hill, where you're now located. So Chalk Hill, it's a very small AVA. It's overlooking the Knights Valley, Alexander Valley, and Russian River Valley. So apart from the fact that it's the hill in the middle of those three valleys, what are some of the main defining factors of Chalk Hill?
Well, I think soils. So again, just on this property, which is just shy of 1,300 acres, we have multiple soil types. Those little pockets, those hills that you said, create little microclimates. The fog is burned off. I'm looking out towards the valley, and the fog's burned off over towards the Russian River. But I think it holds some of the coolness, that fog that comes in here, but it gets a little bit of the heat coming down from Alexander Valley too. So it's kind of the best of both worlds. We grow 9 different varietals on the property. Chardonnay is clearly what we're known for, but we have Cabernet, we have Syrah, we have Malbec also on the property, Zinfandel, Pinot Noir. We can do a lot of different things here because of the influences of both or all 3 AVAs.
I see. Amazing. One thing you do at Chalk Hill Estate is experimenting, with clonal selections of Chardonnay. So you've been doing this for a long time. The winery even has developed its own proprietary clone, the Chardonnay Clone 97. So what makes this clone special?
Well, it took a long time to identify the clone. It took over 20 years of fermenting it separately, sending it to UC Davis for analysis. And the difference mostly is in the palate. So the cluster itself is actually a fairly large cluster, and it has what we call hens and chicks, so big berries and small berries. Oftentimes that's associated with a bad pollination, bad weather in the springtime or something like that. This is the way it grows year in, year out. And that clone in particular seems to have mouthfeel. So we make a wine called the Founders Chardonnay, Founders Block, which is where that clone is grown primarily. And that wine, Bill Foley loves it because it's so rich and round. And while, yes, it's barrel fermented and aged in some new oak, it's the richness from the clone that really makes it different.
I see.
It's exciting to have all these different clones too. It's a fun thing to play with.
I can imagine. So how do you manage blending the different clones from one vintage to another? Do you have for instance, sort of a recipe?
I hate that word. I got to stop you right there. Right. There are no recipes in winemaking. There are protocols, but no recipes. Over the years, you're able to identify what blocks show what characteristics. Over the years, a well-maintained vineyard will show the same characteristics year in, year out. So you kind of go into harvest knowing where those grapes are going to end up. And we do make multiple Chardonnays, and we know that this Chardonnay from this block, say the Founders Block, is going to go into one of our top tier Chardonnays. So we know how we want to bring that in, how we want to treat that. And because they manifest themselves differently, whether it has more acid or more mouthfeel, we know what we're doing when we get there. When it comes to blending, you may change your mind at that point. You may say, okay, this doesn't have the richness that I expected it to have, so we're going to use this block over here instead. I think winemakers earn their keep during harvest and when they're blending. And blending, I think, is the most fun. I mean, harvest is exciting and challenging and all that, but when you're putting a blend together, and Ondine can, I'm sure, agree with this, is that you change a blend by 1%. You add 100 gallons to a blend of a different wine, and everything is different. And the permutations, the possibilities when you're doing blending on an estate like this seem to be endless, and you need to be able to focus down and determine what the best blend will be.
I see. Let's maybe try the Chalk Hill Sonoma Coast Chardonnay. So I have the text sheet here for the benefit of everybody who's not drinking it right now. So I gather, I think that this is your first vintage with the Chalk Hill Chardonnay. This upcoming vintage will be your first vintage. So how do you make sure that everything from the get-go is to your liking, or that you can manage the different vine management techniques that has been used in the past, for instance?
Well, one thing you have to do is find the history of how things were done. And, hopefully most of those things you agree with, but I'm a big proponent of, I used the word earlier, protocols. So for every wine that I'm crafting, I do have a protocol of how I want it to be handled, so that when it comes into the winery, everyone is on the same page. This is how we process this wine or these grapes. This is the type of how we're going to press it, what kind of barrels it's going to be aged in, if it's barrel fermented, if it's tank fermented. All of those things are written out well ahead of time. And then you're always making decisions on the fly. Okay, this fruit looks better. We're going to change something. You're always making those tiny decisions daily. But to have a written protocol, I find very useful for everyone.
I see. So this is 100% Chardonnay?
Yes, it is.
May I prompt Michael something? I think it's so interesting because he has such a unique property here, but and I hope I'm not putting you on the spot by asking, but the chalk of Chalk Hill, I always find it fascinating to let people know that its origin, that's not actually chalk. If you want to speak to that, I think it'd be really interesting.
Yeah, so when our original founder was flying over the property, he thought it looked like chalk. Upon further inspection, it's volcanic ash. We have some great pictures on our website showing the soils, but it is volcanic ash and not chalk.
I'm always a little jealous of volcanic vineyards because they're so fantastic and they have such an interesting flavor profile, and you get that mineral component, and it's fantastic.
Walking a vineyard this weekend, and it was funny as you walked up, and it was a pretty long row, and you're going uphill, and the soil changes from that lighter soil to that volcanic red soil over there, and reds are planted in that property. But yeah, it's fun to look at soil types. We've got a bunch of pits out front that we were just in the other day.
So how does the volcanic soil affect the Chardonnay in your vineyards?
I think right here what we're finding is that there's a minerality to it, not unlike limestone, but there's a minerality to the wines that really shows off this property. And then on the reds, it's not minerality as much as there's just a depth of color and flavor to the wines that are grown in red soils.
Something I've noticed with volcanic soils is you often get the effect of higher elevation almost in the fruit, but at lower elevation, some of the concentration and focus. I used to purchase a lot of fruit out in that general Chalk Hill area, and so I'm fairly familiar with it, but there's just something about it that's distinctive and intriguing and just kind of all the things you want as a winemaker. There's something else to dive deeper into.
Beautiful.
Yeah,
So
I'm excited for this harvest.
Yes, I can imagine. So coming back to this Chardonnay, what are some of the pairings you would see in a restaurant with this wine specifically?
Our chef here, we have a chef on premise. We also have a culinary garden, so he's got a lot of things to choose from. He made a duck the other day that was just amazing. I can't pretend to make up what the recipe was, but it sure went well with this wine. I wish I had his talent.
That's a surprising pairing, isn't it? Duck with Chardonnay.
I've always thought Pinot and Merlot go better. One of the things that we like to highlight is that what's the unexpected thing? I think well-made food, and he's an excellent chef, and well-made wine, more times than not, will pair pretty well together. Now, you have to look for the spice of the wine compared to the spice of whatever food you're pairing. But if you go into it looking for, okay, what can change this, that our guests, our tasting tasters will see that, oh, this is different, this does work. And it's all about experiences too. And so when people come here, we want to make sure they have an interesting experience. Right now, one of the things when guests come here, they can do fried chicken and caviar pairing with Chardonnay. That's different.
That's different.
And it's delicious.
I heard, and maybe David could comment on this because I'm sure David serves a lot of champagne. I heard that champagne and fried chicken was the pairing of the gods. I don't know if it's true or not.
Wow, champagne and why not? Why not? But champagne with the caviar, it's much better than the fried chicken to me.
Amazing. So one final question. How has your personal approach on single varietal wines evolved through the years? You were talking about the protocols that you follow and that you adapt from year to year. So what are some of the key changes that you've made during the years?
I think with single vineyards, you really need to know the vineyards. As I said, I was walking the vineyards this weekend, just trying to get to know them better, see the differences. You need to know your vineyard at all levels, at all times of the season. And you need to know how it likes to manifest itself. So the longer you're at a property, the more time you have to learn the relationship between you and the vineyard and how you want to show that vineyard. And if you're making a single vineyard, you can't mess it up.
Right.
I always feel like there's added pressure on single vineyard wines.
For sure. Amazing. Well, thank you very much, Michael, for your great insights on California wine production.
Thank you.
On va maintenant se tourner vers Share Splash Wine Company. Alors, Share Splash a commencé avec un objectif bien précis, qui est de faire le meilleur Cabernet Sauvignon sous la barre des 20 $. C'est un projet qui a fait des petits avec maintenant 4 vins en monocépage, incluant les 2 vins qu'on va déguster, soit le Sauvignon blanc et le Cabernet Sauvignon. On va voir comment Share Splash se profite de l'assemblage pour combiner les avantages des meilleurs terroirs. Voici donc Undine Chatton, qui est Chief Winemaker pour Share Splash. Hi, Undine.
Hello, thank you for having me.
Of course. So like Michael, you spent many years working as a winemaker in California.
Yes.
So first off, I'm interested maybe in the fact that you've worked with many grape varietals from many regions that are a little bit more obscure in Quebec, so namely Paso Robles, Santa Cruz Mountains, and Contra Costa. So my first question is, what are some of the most interesting varieties that you've worked with coming from the Central Coast?
That's a fantastic area. So the Central Coast I actually went to university down there, and so it was a great place to really dig in early on in my career. And probably the most unusual down there was Blaufränkisch, which is also known as Limburger. It's a spicy and tannic variety. It's not necessarily for every palate, but it's very distinctive and it makes a great blender. And kind of being aware of that flavor profile being out there was really informative as a young winemaker to be on top of that. Another one would be a Trousseau. And there's a white Trousseau or Trousseau Gris as well as Trousseau the red. And Trousseau is also spicy. It's a very intriguing sort of flavor profile. It's a little bit more delicate, sort of along the lines of Pinot Noir, but very pretty, very attractive, and again, beautiful as a blender. And that whole region is so well known now for Rhone varietals, particularly on the west side of Paso Robles, because they have intense heat, but also the temperature is mitigated by a fog bank, much as we are in Sonoma County.
Yeah. Actually, this is a very good point. Here in Quebec at the SAQ, the SAQ just unveiled their assortment plan. So basically, what is their plan to in terms of, or what are they looking for from California? And one of their major points was that they are looking for Rhone varietals from Central Coast.
I can understand that. It's truly one of the areas where the community got together, the industry community, and focused in on certain soil types. There's a huge soil divide between Western Paso and Eastern Paso. And again, very chalk influenced, true chalk influenced soils on that Western side. And so many people have done well there. I love to plug other wineries, but Tablas Creek has just done an amazing, amazing job with that, both in the vineyard side, because they have cultivated clones and they've cleaned up their own plant material, but also they've been so, I'd say, educational. They're really at the forefront of teaching their consumer and the industry about those varieties. So it's great to see that. It helps all of us. It's the rising tide lifts all boats. I think we've all, as winemakers, learned from what's been achieved in that region.
Yes. Well, we're going to see a little bit more of it in the future, I'm pretty sure. So, but now working with Cannonball, you source from various regions and especially from various growers to find the perfect balance between the quality, the perfect style, and the best values. So, which region for you provides the most surprising value? Let's say the best quality at a reasonable price.
So the answer to that would be different for every variety, because there are some regions that are more or less well known for a particular one. If we're talking, since today we're talking about Sauvignon Blanc and Cabernet. For me, Sauvignon Blanc is tremendously beautiful coming out of Mendocino County, which is just to the north of Sonoma. It's, again, heavily influenced by the Pacific Ocean, but it has a huge range of soil types and a lot of high plateau. So there's what we look for a lot of times with vineyards is this large diurnal swing in temperature. So we get a warm afternoon, but then a cooling influence in the evening. And the importance of that is that it just balances the acidity in the grapes, and it has a slow, steady increase in sugar throughout the growing season. So you're getting slow, even ripening, and that even ripening means that all the components that we're looking for that are coming out of the skin or out of the berry flesh have time to develop, to mature. So if you're looking at aromatic components or textural components, Michael spoke earlier to that hens and chicks phenomenon, that millirondage, that if you think about it, those tiny berries, there are tannins even in a white skin. And so you do get a textural component that comes from that because you have a higher surface area to volume. So up in Mendocino County, when you get this very slow, steady sort of increase in sugar, nice cool nights, you maintain the acidity. And because it hasn't been quite as popular as, say, Sonoma County, pricing is still pretty reasonable. So you can get very good value for money. If we're talking about Cabernet Sauvignon, then it's a little different for me. Cabernet is grown just about everywhere. And I think pretty well almost everywhere. It's a versatile grape. It's a resilient grape. But I love the Monterey area. So Monterey County, again, Salinas Valley, but further south, sort of Arroyo Seco area. That has a strong wind influence coming in off the ocean. So you get a combination of the cooling impact and also these steady breezes. So having a breeze, of course, cools down the ambient air, but it also can even get to a point where it starts to shut down the vines a little bit, and the vine focuses on maturing its fruit. So you get really good concentration, great tannic structure, beautiful color out of that region. And again, the pricing is significant below that of Sonoma County.
I can imagine. So sourcing wines from various vineyards, it kind of comes with the additional challenge of analyzing the output of many different batches from many different places. So unless I'm mistaken, I understand that you have to do what Michael does on a vineyard basis, but with different vineyards coming from different places. So how early in the growing season do you have to start making decisions on which block will make it into your wines, or which block will you have to forego this year?
So it sounds hard to fathom, but next year's crop is actually being set this year. So everything we do in the vineyard this year is going to affect what happens in vintage 2022 as well. So these decisions are made incredibly early on. So this can be everything from that first drink of water. Sometimes you get a nice deep irrigation right after harvest to make sure the vine is healthy to start off the next vintage. Then the pruning decisions, the cover crop, how we're going to do deficit irrigation. It goes way, way, way back. So knowing that each of those blocks is going to be a unique contribution or a unique contributor into the final blend, we start thinking about this even before that fruit is even evident. So right now it's the bud break season. So we're seeing that first emergence of the little buds and tiny shoots coming out. And we're already very on top of certain blocks, knowing which ones struggle traditionally, or we are in a pretty severe water situation right now, in a drought situation in California. In fact, some rather severe restrictions were just imposed a few days ago. And so even looking at things right now going, okay, we're gonna have to do things a bit differently. Maybe we won't open up the canopy as early in this vine, and we can go and pull leaves later, but let's make sure that we don't get it to a point where it's so exposed that if the heat comes in that we can't protect it, or we won't have enough water to maintain those vines through the season. So it's a bit of an aside, but my point is just that we start so far back in the growing process to think about which components will go into the final wine. On a more practical, from a more practical standpoint on that, after vintage, we try to make each block to the best of its potential, and then over the next few months sort of evaluate them. Some blocks, it's easy early on. You say these two components are very complementary, but generally speaking, I like to structure my wines a bit like a skeletal framework. You want something that's the backbone. You want something that's got the structure and kind of puts the body into place. And then we start filling in the details, the flesh, the eyes, the ears, the shoulders, the legs, all of that with other blending components. And so for me, it's kind of taking a holistic look. What do you want the frame to be? What's the foundation of this wine? And then over the course of 6, 9, 12 months, kind of layer in different components that bring that wine to life. And wines change over the course of their aging as well. It's very much, I know Michael can speak to this too, it's very much an evolutionary process. So these two components that you married early on may evolve considerably differently over the next 6 months, and there may be a hollow spot in the middle and you need to fill that in with something. So it's, I don't like to blend right up to the point of bottling because you don't know what you'll have later, but really up until about 3 months before bottling and making little tweaks here and there, trying to ensure that what we have will be very complete.
I see. One question I had here. So are there times when the combination of two sourcing, well, I guess you probably already answered this in part, but are there times when the combination of two sourcing locations gave a better result than the sum of its parts? So apart from seeing the structural components or the backbone from this place, and then the details from that place, are there places or vineyards that complement each other particularly well? Surprisingly so.
Absolutely. Yes, maybe unsurprisingly, I think the exception is a standalone vineyard. Like a vineyard designate is the rarity in the industry. Not every vineyard merits a designate of its own. Every vineyard has something to contribute, but more often than not, they are better when blended, or lots or parcels are better when blended. And that's just because something as simple as aspect. So I think this is probably a more interesting way to answer your question. Even in the same vineyard, in the same block, sometimes a block goes over a hillside. So you're having an eastern exposure and a western exposure in the same block. You're going to get very different ripening in those two exposures. And so the eastern facing side gets the morning sun. It's very gentle sort of heat. It's very slow usually to ripen. That western side's going to get the heat of the afternoon sun. You might get big, jammy, robust flavors, whereas you'll get a little bit more refinement, more sophisticated, more understated character on the other side of the hill. So those are perfect examples, I think, of where those two components together, you get the best of both worlds. You'll get that structure, you'll get the elegance, but then you'll get the jammy, the plushness, the generosity of that western side. So for me, I think that's probably what you're getting at. Absolutely. There can be moments where you just think, wow, these two wines together, they just create something so harmonious and so much more interesting.
I see. Was there any time that a particular location kind of saved or protected your vintage significantly more than if you had left it up? So for instance, a vintage where most of the regions you produce from were either very, very warm or very, very rich, and then you found this gem from this place or from that place, which kind of brought the structure back to the level you would want it to be?
So yes, this is part of where we cast a very wide net as far as sourcing with Share a Splash. So I go as far south as Santa Barbara County, occasionally even down into the Rancho Cucamonga area, which is down near Los Angeles, but mostly Santa Barbara, then north through Mendocino and Lake County. And so sometimes, depending on the vintage, the crop will be drastically affected. So sometimes we get hit by frost. And so the crop will be dramatically reduced in the North Coast or maybe on the Central Coast. And so we won't have as much fruit from that area. Knowing that some of these other regions have just very distinctive characters, I kind of know how to proportionally reweigh those together. There's one area in particular, to answer your question specifically, is San Benito, which is down near Monterey area. It has some, again, generous fruit, great richness, beautiful depth of colors, great length. And normally that would only be a small component of any particular vintage for us, maybe 7%. But I've had years where we've bumped that up to around 18% because it's able to fill in the gaps of something that came in a little too hot or a little too lean. Absolutely, that does happen. And of course, the big elephant in the room on that is fire. Yes, we know California's been ravaged by wildfire, and being able to pivot and source from other areas and not change the style dramatically has been very helpful these last several years.
I can imagine. All right, we're going to start tasting with the Cannonball Sauvignon Blanc. So David will actually be our mouth and our taste buds for this one here.
Yes, but I have just one question for Andine before the tasting. So can you tell us what are the differences between all the brands under Share a Splash?
Yes. So we make, or what I'm responsible for making, are the Angels and Cowboys and the Cannonball wines, which Angels and Cowboys is sourced just here in Sonoma County exclusively. And then Cannonball is sourced from throughout California. And then we also import and distribute Astrolab. And actually, sorry, I don't know if we do that in Canada. I apologize. So that's what we have. And we've got 6 wines. Thank you, Chantal. We have 6 wines total, and we're bringing in, I'm so excited about this, a Brut Rosé and a Brut under the Angels and Cowboys label.
Beautiful. That's coming to Quebec?
It is. Well, Chantal's working on it.
Yes, actually, a small batch and consignment is on its way.
Beautiful. So be on the lookout for this. All right.
Right,
I'll
so
put
we
up
have-
the, yep. So,
Ok, donc là, je vais continuer en français puisque la plupart des sommeliers, je pense qu'ils vont bien me comprendre. Donc, sur ce vin-là, déjà le nez vraiment typique du Sauvignon blanc, on va vraiment s'orienter sur ce côté fruit exotique. On retrouve des notes aussi d'agrumes. On va vraiment retrouver ce petit côté litchi aussi au deuxième nez. Les notes aussi de melon blanc qui ressortent en finale aussi. C'est vraiment, le nez est vraiment très très beau. Puis déjà, rien qu'au nez, on ressent vraiment beaucoup de fraîcheur. Ça, c'est quand même assez intéressant de toujours ressentir la fraîcheur même au nez, parce que ça nous prépare sur la bouche et puis avoir vraiment cette impression de minéralité avant tout. Puis en bouche, je le trouve merveilleux parce que tout à l'heure, quand je l'ai sorti du frigo pour le goûter, c'était vraiment très très beau, très frais. Puis je me suis dit, je vais le garder un petit peu à température pour voir comment est-ce qu'il va réagir, parce que le vin, quand il se réchauffe, ben, il va nous parler un petit peu plus, j'ai l'impression. Et puis donc lui en fait garde toujours sa belle minéralité. C'est tout en fraîcheur. On est toujours sur ces notes d'agrumes, ce côté pamplemousse qui apporte encore ce petit zeste supplémentaire. Et puis la bouche, c'est tout en longueur, c'est frais. On a un petit côté salin en finale aussi, cette petite pointe de salinité qui va mettre en valeur donc tout le reste des arômes. Puis moi, je trouve que ce vin-là, on pourrait facilement le marier. Ben soit on peut ouvrir ça à l'apéritif ou à n'importe quelle heure du jour ou de la nuit. C'est tellement frais. Ou bien alors, moi, je le verrais bien aussi sur des pétoncles à l'unilatéral avec une petite sauce, mais pas, je dirais pas de sauce crémée, mais plus sur une vinaigrette aux agrumes légèrement tiédie pour mettre sur le dessus des pétoncles. Ça serait vraiment, je pense, un accord assez intéressant à faire.
Super. J'ai enlevé la fiche technique. Je pense qu'on n'avait pas besoin de la fiche technique. On a ta description en même temps.
Belle description.
Tout à fait.
Merci.
Yes, thank you. That was beautiful. This a word we don't have in English. We use citrus, but the agrume is just so beautiful and spot on, getting that entire range of citrus fruits. That's lovely. Thank you. And I love that you mentioned the salinity as well, because that salinity is something that makes the wine pair well with, I always say, anything from the sea, poached seafood. But something I do personally really enjoy is shaved asparagus. So just the thinnest, tiniest little curls of asparagus, even if it's like a chiffonade inside in a salad, really brings out some of those green components in the Sauvignon Blanc, makes it fresh and lively. Thank you for that description.
Merci.
We have two questions here. One question which I think was asked to Michael, but I think both of you can answer to the best of your ability. So Dave Hamel says, as the customers and wine drinkers are more and more conscious about residual sugar content in the wines, how have you had to adapt to a market which is different than the one you have in California? So how do you adapt to different taste profiles in general, and specifically to residual sugar, but in general, how do you adapt to different taste profiles coming from different wine drinking import regions?
So it's always a dance. It's different there. So we generally tend to be a drier style at Share a Splash. It's our founder he emigrated to the US from Israel. He's had a European palate. He really is very conscious about having wines dry. As a winemaker, it's always peace of mind to have dry wines as well. We like to get them completely dry. We don't like to leave the sugar around. That being said, depending on the acidity of the wine, a little bit of sweetness, whether it's the perception of sweetness or actual residual sugar, can be very important to the balance in the wine. And in the end, for me, it's always about balance. I've had wines that have maybe 3 grams per liter of sugar that no one can tell are sweet. And maybe that's because the acidity is around 7 grams or something per liter. But generally speaking, yes, being health conscious being responsible and wanting stability in the wine, we like to make sure they're not super sweet. I do find that in general, people who are enthusiastic about wine tend to like their wines drier. And there's absolutely a market for sweeter wines. There's no shame. I always say that anyone should drink whatever they like, but people who are truly enthusiastic about pairing wine with food and are wanting to taste a sense of the region or know where the sourcing is coming from, there tends to be a worldwide global approach to a drier style of wine, at least in my experience. But maybe Michael has a different one.
I think Dean hit it out of the park with that response. I agree with everything she just said.
Amazing.
Thank you.
Maybe we can move on to, I'm trying to be cautious of time here, to Cannonball Cabernet Sauvignon.
Oui, donc le Cabernet Sauvignon, au nez, on est vraiment sur une explosion de fruits rouges. On va retrouver un petit côté cerise, la note vanillée. Vraiment un très beau nez. Plus on l'aère et plus il se développe. On va vraiment partir sur un petit côté aussi un petit peu fumé. Est-ce que ça pourrait venir du petit pourcentage de Syrah qu'on a à l'intérieur? Ça serait possible? Puisque j'ai vu qu'au niveau de l'assemblage, on était sur 80% de Cabernet Sauvignon, 8% de Syrah, 7% de petit verre d'eau, puis 5% de Zinfandel. Donc peut-être que ce côté fumé ressort de la Syrah. En bouche, on est vraiment sur le côté cassis, mûr sauvage. On est vraiment sur un vin qui est très bien équilibré, très bien balancé au niveau de la sucrosité, puisqu'on parlait de sucrosité tantôt. Puis ça se ressent vraiment à peine. Il y a quand même un peu plus de 3 grammes de sucre résiduel, mais ça se ressent quasiment pas. On a ce côté fruits rouges, fruits noirs sur la première impression. On va s'orienter un petit peu sur un côté épicé, un petit peu poivré aussi en finale. C'est un vin qui est facile à boire. Moi, je dirais que même je dirais, la température, là, je l'ai gardé depuis tantôt. Je le servirais peut-être un petit poil plus frais que ce que j'ai en ce moment dans le verre. Donc, à la sortie du cellier, il serait vraiment parfait. Ça garderait toujours son côté croquant, son côté fruit qui serait là. Et puis, je le verrais sur une belle, sur de l'agneau de présalé, avec une réduction de jus d'agneau toute simple pour mettre en valeur ce plat-là et puis le vin. C'est un vin qui est facile à boire. On s'attend toujours à des gros cabernets puissants, structurés, mais là, on est vraiment sur quelque chose de très frais, facile à boire. Bravo, très très bien. Puis surtout pour le prix aussi, quand on voit à combien sort le cabernet, on se dit c'est quand même intéressant d'avoir des beaux cabernets comme ça à ces prix-là. Vraiment.
Thank you. I appreciate the nod for value for money. We do pride ourselves on offering a equitably priced wine. And that I like that you mentioned the ripe blackberry or the wild blackberry character. We look for that sort of dusty roadside blackberry character and that little bit of pepperiness as well. And of course, I think the obvious difference between Sauvignon Blanc here is bringing in oak. Oak becomes and plays a major role in this wine and sort of knitting all those different components together. You mentioned the blending components. So to pull those together, I find that oak kind of stitches those different fragments together and kind of makes them more cohesive.
Yeah, and the smoky flavors come from the Syrah, maybe?
Yes, exactly. So I happen to love Syrah. I think most winemakers have a special place for Syrah. It has never taken off in the United States as a popular varietal on its own, but it brings that wonderful meaty earthiness to the blend. So all of my wines, I like a point counterpoint. I love something that's bright and fresh and fruity and draws you in, but then I like something a little bit more base, a little bit more earth driven that gives not only pairing well with food, but it gives more dimension to the wine. And Syrah's very good at doing that.
Yeah. It's a very good blend. And for the price, I said that the price, it's very interesting. $25 for that bottle. It's very interesting.
Thank you. And part of this is the sourcing from all over. So sourcing from many different appellations, but then also working with the same people, the same growers from those regions, which helps in continuity from vintage to vintage, and also in fine tuning, because if we know that we did something the previous year that wasn't quite right, we can go back in the next year and fine tune that and make that even better, or get it more aligned with our style.
That's great. Thank you very much. It's very good.
Beautiful. Well, thank you very much, Undine, for your great insights on California winemaking. Et merci à nos deux vignerons et à nos deux autres, ainsi qu'à David Goiran de la Maison Boulud. J'espère que vous avez bien écouté les producteurs. On va maintenant poser 4 questions et la personne qui répond correctement le plus rapidement à chaque question se verra mériter une bouteille de vin. Donc, les participants ne peuvent gagner qu'une seule bouteille, évidemment. Donc, à vos claviers. Pour se mériter une bouteille de Chalk Hill Chardonnay 2018, la question, à quel AVA est-ce que Chalk Hill touche? Donc, Chalk Hill est entouré de 3, oui, tout à fait, Calvin, très rapide sur le clavier, Russian River Valley. Donc, félicitations, tu mérites une bouteille de Chalk Hill Chardonnay. Au niveau du Sebastiani Chardonnay, de quelle zone / quel AVA proviennent les raisins utilisés pour produire le chardonnay? Spécifiquement, quel AVA? Donc, ici, on est sur un Lodi, Gontran, félicitations. Au niveau du Cannonball Sauvignon Blanc, difficile. Nommez-moi un des cépages intéressants avec lesquels Undine a travaillé dans le passé. Trousseau, oui, Maxime, félicitations. Spécifiquement Trousseau gris et Trousseau blanc, je crois. Cépage que moi, personnellement, je ne connaissais pas du tout. Cannonball, pour se mériter la dernière bouteille, Cannonball Cabernet Sauvignon 2018. À partir de quel moment est-ce que Undine commence à faire des choix importants sur le vignoble? Peut-être une question un petit peu difficile, ça. Oui, tout à fait. On va y aller avec Mélanie, Gontran a déjà gagné une bouteille. Donc, Mélanie Frappier, previous year, 1 an à l'avance, carrément. C'est quand même assez impressionnant. Donc, félicitations à vous 4. Je crois que ça résume parfaitement une super belle session de sommelier, un webinaire qui était très interactif. Donc, au nom de l'Institut des vins de Californie, je vais vous remercier pour votre participation, pour toutes vos questions intéressantes. J'espère qu'on a répondu à toutes les questions. Je crois que oui. Donc, merci finalement à Undine Chatton, Michael Boulac, Chantal Landreville, David Goiran et Sébastien Ouellette pour avoir partagé avec nous leurs connaissances. Merci à vous tous.